Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience as everyone joins us in the webinar room. We will begin in just a moment. All right, welcome to our MPF webinar, Horizon 2, one part wildlife, one part ecosystem services, and one part renewable energy with Steve Mowry and Ben Kruger. My name is Amanda Lance-Ramrup, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native program. Thank you all for joining us today for the next webinar of our 2025 series. Now for a few Zoom fundamentals before we continue. When you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A section of your screen, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. Questions placed into the chat will be asked to be redirected to the Q&A section. I'm excited to share that we are joined today by MPF's Executive Director, Carol David, as our Q&A facilitator. Thanks to her facilitation, we hope to cover as much ground as possible. Everyone streaming in has our gratitude in advance for your thoughtful live submissions. Now to introduce today's speakers. Steve Mowry is a past president of the Missouri Prairie Foundation and a two-time Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation president to boot. He owns a farm in Adair County, Missouri, and a native remnant prairie nearby. Steve has been a lawyer for 42 years in the Kansas City area and lives on a farm in Clinton County. Steve currently serves as the director of Prairie Establishment for Roeslein Alternative Energy. Also, we have Ben Kruger, who is the Senior Vice President of Renewables for Roeslein. In his role, Ben is leading the development and operations of larger-scale renewable natural gas production assets. Ben is also very involved in Roeslein's work with prairie reconstruction and renewable biomass feedstocks. Prior to joining Roeslein, Ben spent 25 years with the Cargill Corporation in a variety of commodity trading and business leadership roles. Several of Ben's roles involved leading renewable energy and sustainability businesses, including Cargill's North American biodiesel business, renewable natural gas business, and the launch and scaling of their regenerative agriculture platform, RegenConnect. On a more personal note, Ben grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin and was inspired to pursue a career in agriculture via his family's centuries-long connection to the industry. Ben studied agricultural business at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He and his family currently reside in Victoria, Minnesota, and are avid skiing enthusiasts, as well as deeply involved with several nonprofits serving the special needs community. Now, without further ado, Steve and Ben, I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and thank you all you attenders today to our webinar. This is Steve Mowry, and I'm going to ask Ben to come in first and give us his perspective of what Horizon 2 is. And when he gets finished, I'll take it from there.
That sounds great, Steve. Thank you so much for the intro, and great to be in front of all of you today. I'm really excited about it. Horizon 2 is really it's a vision into the future of renewable energy production, we think globally, but also one that integrates some really cool outcomes, the intersection of positive outcomes for soil, for air, for water, and also for ecology. And so we're going to spend our time this afternoon talking a little bit about how those circles intersect and how this project, linked with some grant and some funding from the USDA, is hoping to bring all this to life.
Thanks, Ben. So, folks, I can't see who all of you are there, but I'm sure I know a lot of you. And I want you to know that this Horizon 2 project, which flows directly from the brain of Rudy Roeslein, had an origin with the Missouri Prairie Foundation. Going back to around 2005, 2006, we made a leap of faith with the premium standard hog company in North Missouri, approached them, and they gave us 600 acres of land to turn into a prairie. We thought that it might be a good idea, that they had a positive thing to talk about. And we took that 600 acres where they didn't charge us any land or any rent. We got a big grant for it from the USDA. and created a really truly beautiful prairie that exists just as pretty as it today as it did then. And it was through the stewardship of that prairie, and at the time Rudy Roeslein had allowed me to appoint him to the board of the Prairie Foundation, that he saw that prairie, he saw the hog operation that was up there, and asked me to introduce him to the folks at Premium Standard Farms. And so after a long period of discussion and negotiating back and forth, he invested over time over $180 million in North Missouri, and took a company that had been struggling and essentially took all of the pollution causing manure, put it through a process, harvested the methane, turns it into the equivalent of natural gas, and injects it into the pipeline for a very valuable natural gas commodity that has an enhanced value because of its very green nature, that it's actually causing methane not to go into the atmosphere. So it's been a really positive thing for the environment, positive thing for what is now Smithfield Foods, a positive thing for Roeslein Alternative Energy, and a really positive thing for the communities of North Missouri. This really flows from Rudy's vision of 30 million acres of new tallgrass prairie in the upper Midwest. We're all very familiar with what has happened with the tallgrass prairie since European settlement. It has constantly, consistently, steadily declined to where now, in some places, it's less than 1% to 2%. Other places, it's 0.1% of what it stood before. And Rudy often made the comment when he was on the board that, look, folks, we can be altruistic all we want to be. We can donate money, we can beg for money, we can, have fundraisers, and still we're going to be limited by altruism. If we're going to have a very positive impact on restoring prairie acres in this country, we have to have an economic driver for it. We have to find a way that landowners can actually make money and do better off of a prairie than if they would if they put it into soybeans or corn. And frankly, none of us ever understood how that would ever happen until he was able to hit on the idea of what we call Horizon 2. So Horizon 2 is a concept that we would have a reconstructed prairie, and then we would harvest biomass off of that prairie, mix it with manure from a hog operation. We need the manure for the microbes and the bacteria that come there or come with that manure. Mix it in an above ground, what we call a CSTR digester, that would create natural gas. And so coming out of that is also a nutrient recovery program where we would actually collect a saleable form of nitrogen. We would then have biofibers left over from the process that we envision will go back on the land as the form of a soil amendment. So we look at it as this: what kind of conservation do we want to have? Do we want to have the conservation of the buffalo, which came down to under 1,000, under 1,000 buffalo in existence, or bison, to where now we have a herd of somewhere around 500,000 in this country? It's been a success story. It's been a long time coming, but the bison herd is now secured, and it's a growing one because there's an economic market for the bison, where you can actually go in and buy bison meat in meat markets. You can buy bison products in restaurants. Or are we faced with looking at a conservation result like the Carolina parakeet or the passenger pigeon, where unfortunately neither one of those were ever able to find an economic driver, and tragically each of them disappeared. They weren't just extirpated, they were exterminated, and are no longer in existence for us. It's too late for us to bring any of those back. And so is that the conservation model that we want for the tallgrass prairie? I don't think any of us do, because I know that every one of you that are on today have a real deep love for the prairie and for all of the wildlife on the prairie, whether it's pollinators or particularly the ground nesting birds. I personally come to the whole prairie world because of my love of the wild turkey. And I go back into the late 1990s when I was hooked up with Frank Oberle and my quest to find better hatching cover, better nesting cover, and better brood cover for wild turkeys in North Missouri. And I was connected to him, and Frank got me into this prairie path to where and I'm sure each of you or many of you have gone down this where you think you know what you're looking at, then all of a sudden you find out there's way more there than you can ever understand in one lifetime. So Rudy's Rudy's vision again is 30 million acres in 30 years. And the USDA in 2023 recognized that vision and the value of the economic driver that he proposed by granting to us a climate smart commodities grant of $80 million to be spread out over 5 years, the goals of which include the reestablishment of a reconstructed amount of prairie of 40,000 acres. We also have goals of 40,000 acres of cover crops that would be on the ground in the winter after soybeans or corn have been harvested, so that we go into the next spring with an actual green crop on the ground, doing all the good things for the soil and the environment that cover crops do. And so in January of 2024, I came on board with Roeslein, and by the end of February, I'd secured our goal of 1,000 acres for the first year, and we were able to secure a seed source with local ecotype Missouri and southern Iowa seeds for that 1,000 acres. We chose North Missouri because there are 5 hog operations that are located there already that are in the Grand River Basin. And I'm sure a lot of you know that the Grand River Basin is recognized as one of the biggest contributors to nitrate infiltration into the Missouri and Mississippi river systems that then go down into the Gulf of Mexico and cause the hypoxic zone, which has caused a great amount of dead area where there aren't any fish or fishing available. And so we've looked at this for some time as a really important step in the Grand River Basin through the establishment of prairie and prairie strips to inhibit or to slow down or to actually stop the infiltration of the nitrogen. And now that we have the Gulf of America, I think the hypoxic zone hits a lot harder. I don't think we would ever allow a hypoxic zone to exist in Lake Superior or Lake Michigan. And I hope that we take a look at now and say we certainly can't have that in the Gulf of America. So that's one of our great goals. We can do our part in the Grand River Basin. And so our goal for the second year, which has the planning just finished, second year, which was 2025, we did our planning in January and a little bit into February. We got the great amount of it done in January, was an additional 4,000 acres. I'm really pleased to say that we got all that done with a really high quality amount of diverse species. We have 28 local ecotype plants. We have 4 or 5 of those are grasses and the rest are forbs with blooming periods throughout each of the different blooming seasons, starting late spring and then all the way through the fall. We're really happy with our seed. We're really happy with the results we had last year. And we're really excited about what we're going to see this year. About 4,000 acres of that planting is in northern Mercer County. If you're familiar with that county, Princeton is the county seat. And so we're already hearing from our landowners that we planted last year of the 1,062 acres of a really dramatic increase in birds, and including quail. Quail used to be ubiquitous on our North Missouri landscape. And just like in every other state that had quail, we've seen a dramatic decline in those birds over the years. And what what we've learned is that whereas we used to have quail as a result of our farming practices, now because of farming practices, we have to be very volitional in the way we act to even have quail. And it just so happens our newly established prairies, if you will, are perfect homes for quail, and we're seeing a really good response there. Our landowners are also excited about all the turkeys they see brooding out in those fields with, the young birds. So our goal for this upcoming year is 10,000 more acres, which seems like a tall hill to step, but we're working at it right now, lining folks up. It's a really good opportunity for a conservation minded landowner. We pay $160 a year. And for now, going forward, it's on 3-year contracts. So as soon as they sign up with us, and as soon as we get our seed on the ground, we pay them $160 per acre. So far, it has all been row crop ground because that's the best prescription for getting success. If you go into a good, clean seed bed, we can accept ground that is currently in grass or a pasture ground, but it's a much more complicated matter because we have to take a look at it and see if it's cool season turf that needs to be eliminated, and if we want to really evaluate to see if it has a lot of warm season or native prairie elements, and if it does, we sure don't want to wipe out those native prairie elements. But there's also a hurdle that we're dealing with, that everybody that works with USDA, there's a thing called a CPA 52 review. And if the farm has not been in row crops for 4 of the last 7 years, it has to go through the CPA 52 review, which is, it's kind of a lot of paperwork and a long process to go through. So far with our 5,062 acres, it's all been into very marginal row crop ground. And like I said, we're getting some really good results. We have in Adair County what I think are close to 2,000 prospective acres that are native remnant prairie. They've never been plowed. They've always been either hayed or mostly grazed. And in driving around and looking at them, Frank Oberly and Zach Coy and I have just come to the conclusion we have so much prairie there that we don't want to run the risk of any glyphosate or planting of crops. We just want, as soon as we get hold of those properties, we want to do it with some burning and see what can really come out, because we're really excited about the prospect of adding 2,000 or 2,500 more acres of native remnant prairie to the collection of prairies that the Missouri Department of Conservation and even closer to our heart, the Missouri Prairie Foundation has put together over the years. And by the way, shout out to the MPF. When I was president, we celebrated the 50th anniversary in 2006. MPF was founded in 1966. And if I do my math right, next year, Carol and everybody, we're going to be looking at a 75th anniversary. I hope we can have some kind of blowout opportunity, maybe up on one of our prairies. It'd be great to have you up there. So the goal at the end of Horizon 2 is 40,000 acres of new prairie. And I'm going to apologize in advance for using the word prairie. I understand that what a native prairie remnant is, and that there's no way in our lifetime we can ever successfully exactly recreate what a native prairie is. But there aren't enough good words in English to express what I'm trying to say. So if I say prairie and I should be saying reconstitute or reconstructed prairie, give me a little grace there, because it's a shorthand way of me working with the concept. So I just want to give you some numbers here very quickly that you might not jot down or think about. So 40,000 is the number of acres of new planted prairie or grassland. Another 40,000 acres of cover crops, 5 digesters to be constructed in North Missouri, 5,062 acres that we currently have seeded. We've made payments to landowners so far of $969,920. The cost of our air seeding so far has been $352,000. We have vacant landowners over 30 acres in our 5 areas of 8,984. In other words, there are 8,984 vacant landowners that own more than 30 acres in our 5 target areas. I believe there are about 12,000 landowners that actually live in those areas, and we have done a direct mailing to all the landowners that live there. We're getting ready to do a direct mailing to those absentee landowners. So far, we have spent almost $1.7 million. That money going into seed producers and the local economy, landowners and people that have done the work for us. We created in the last 13 months 340 miles of field edge. So from our prairie that we've planted, it's, if you just measure it on it with a map, it's 340 miles long. If you look about the potential total impact, we know that the value of our program in part is avoided costs. What are the avoided costs of planting prairie? Well, if you think about just simply the cost of listing on the endangered species list, the eastern monarch butterfly, we don't know the total cost of what that's going to be, but we know there's going to be a cost to landowners. In our program so far, in 13 months, we've planted 41,500,000 milkweed seeds, half of which are common milkweed, another half are butterfly milkweed. The other avoided costs that I like to think about and talk about all the time is the impact that we can have on local rain events. I'm sure most of you know that with development, rain events become a much more dangerous thing. On a native tall, and it doesn't have to be a native, but a good prairie with its deep roots, a 3-inch rain event results in the runoff of approximately 2/10 to 3/10 of an inch. In a 3-inch rain event on bare ground, runoff is 2 inches. So what is the total avoided cost of not having that type of runoff, carrying with it all the soil, the earth that is taken with it, but just in the amount of water that gets infiltrated back into our aquifer and not going into the streams in such a violent way? We know that if we can restore 30 million acres in 30 years, we're going to have a really important impact on the rivers and streams. We'll have more of a continuous set of streams. They'll be cleaner. We'll clean up the river and clean up the Gulf of America. And there's just so many things that Ben and I are excited about. I'd love to reserve the rest of our time to answering questions if we can. And Ben, if you have anything that I've left out, please chime in.
Thanks, Steve. I would just add for the audience that the is part of that long-term vision on 30 million acres. This connection and intersection with energy is really important. I think, Steve, you really made the point early that altruism alone would not really move the needle on the development of these things. And so what is exciting is that as you look out into future years, as world population grows, but as world energy use grows, and data centers would be a great example of that, there is a strong desire in all of that to, as much as possible, grow that energy use sustainably. To create sustainable energy, you need sustainable sources, and you need either the sun or the wind, or in the case of our industry, you need feedstocks. And so with what our industry's developed so far, a lot of the easier feedstocks to make renewable gas are either being used or being taken, will be taken soon. And so I think the opportunity for biomass from prairie or potentially from cover crops is really, really huge. And so this 30 million acres, it sounds like a lot. It absolutely can really move the needle on some sustainable energy demand that is out there. And so that's where we get excited on integrating these to bring back some part of that those economics in that energy chain to give landowners and give farmers and give other people connected to that an incentive to convert. And that's just something we haven't always had in the past. And as markets emerge, I think we see more of that in the future. So I personally get excited about where all this can go as we get to the other side of the grant and what we're learning. And my background is more in trading and working in market development and doing that globally. And so I can see the demand emerging, and I can really see where what we're doing here is going to intersect nicely with that long term. So that's exciting.
And
I think,
if I
we've
could
got some
also,
stats on your, go ahead, Steve.
oh, I was just going to add that, we need energy in this country. We're going to need more and more energy. I don't know if any of you folks have used it, but I've started using AI recently, Grok and some other forms. I understand that the just artificial intelligence is going to raise the need for electricity just exponentially as we go forward. And I don't think the numbers are there to where we can run this country on electrical alone. We have in existence underground right now a $1 trillion gas grid. And what is so cool about our program is that we're able to tap into that gas grid, put the gas that we create and go into the grid that is existing and sell those molecules of natural gas, changed natural gas, right to consumers across the country. And so we don't have to create new transmission lines. We don't have to hardly do any of that. So we need to take advantage of that great investment that's been made in our country. And natural gas has proven to be a pretty clean element that we can use to power cars and power buses and heat homes and do lots of things with. So we need a lot of energy in this country. We're going to have more people, and we have more demands upon the energy resources we have now. So if you have any questions, Carol, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you both very much. Very exciting and such impressive numbers. We do have a number of questions, and I bet we will have more as we go along. One question pertains to the harvesting of the cover crops and of the prairie biomass. Maybe Steve or Ben, you could go into a bit more detail on what time of year the cover crop biomass is harvested, what time of year the prairie biomass is harvested. Of course, I guess none has been harvested yet because we're in the establishment phases. But I think the idea is not that it would all be harvested at one time because we want to provide some cover for wildlife. But could you go into more detail about the harvesting process for both the cover crops and the prairie plantings?
Sure. I can briefly talk about the cover crops. There's a very narrow window of time that you would harvest the cover crops. You have to get them when they're at a point right before the farmer is going to want to come in and put in soybeans in the spring. So we're probably looking in the month of April across much of Missouri, maybe early May. If you wait too much longer, the farmer's going to be running you out of the field. And if you get too early and try to take it, the cover crop, the cereal rye is going to come back on you. So you've got to cut it at just the right time. So that's a really interesting challenge to get that many acres done in a really short window. For the prairie, this is a program in progress. Our Horizon 2 is 3 parts. It's 1, gas production. It's an equal amount of conservation, wildlife aspects, and the third is ecosystem services. So it's really important to Rudy. It's really important to me and everybody that works on our team that when we harvest prairie, we're not harvesting ground nesting birds. So the conservation department has always recommended up until recently that you don't do any harvesting until July the 15th. We want to be as close to that as we can. We want to harvest after most ground nesting birds have done their thing. Now, I think recently they have extended that if you can wait longer to cut your hay, try to do that, because some birds, continue to try to nest throughout the year. I think our plan is to harvest in such a way that we leave areas for the birds, that we not harvest every year at the same place, the same way, the same time. We've recently done some testing of January harvested biomass, and have found out it has cellulosic contents that are favorable for what we need to do. We don't know about some of the other energy producing contents, but I can see us harvesting some, or maybe even the majority of what we're doing in the winter, which would be awesome. But we have to remember we have different masters here. The very important master is the birds, but we also have to recognize that we have to make gas, and we have to do it economically. And so we're going to be working at that. We've, frankly, I've been looking at a program that might involve, some aspect of grazing also, and resting and harvesting. All of that still is an open question, because it takes 3 years to grow a prairie. As you all know, the first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. So we're not on our third year yet, but by then we expect to have our processes a little more hammered out. But for me, I really don't want to interrupt the nesting activity of our birds. To me, that's the most important.
Thank you. So another question about requirements of landowners to meet in terms of the biodiversity requirements. So can you speak a bit about the seed mix that is being used for those prairie plantings?
I wish I had brought that today to share with everybody, but it's a 28 species mix. Like I said, we're using local ecotype. Only 5 of those are grasses. All the rest are forbs. Everything from butterfly milkweed to common milkweed, and rigid goldenrod, just all the same species that you would expect. It's very, very similar to a pollinator planting that you would have through EQIP or a conservation stewardship program. It's a really high quality mix. We'd love to be 75 species, but we just don't have all the money in the world right now. Our seed costs about $350 an acre for that, and we're fortunate that we worked out a deal to have that seed for the duration. I mean, that price for the duration of the program, but we had to pull the trigger somewhere, and Rudy spent a lot of time with Carol and biologists and others trying to come up with just the perfect seed mix. And there is no perfect seed mix. We have 150, 200 species to pull from, and we just had to pull from ones that are economically viable, ones that are available, and that can do the job they have to do to provide a home for wildlife and biogas for the pipeline.
Sure. And you said 28 species, I think.
28. Mm-hmm.
28, which is certainly much more than if it were, in one species of tall fescue, for example. And there's another question about wanting to dive deeper into the actual energy production process. There's a question, are you still planning a 3-year harvest/haying interval on the prairie plantings, and what other inputs will be required? And I don't know if Ben wants to answer this, but as I understand it, Ben, creating energy from biomass is not anything new. Groups in Europe have been doing this, and actually civilizations in one form or another have been using biomass of one form or another. Could you talk a bit about kind of the current picture of using biofeedstocks for energy production, and then a bit more about the actual process here with your project?
Yeah, I'll hit the second part of that first. The process used, it's a process of anaerobic digestion and kind of biological processing. It's actually a 200-year-old process. So I think there was part of the chat was kind of, yeah, is there new technology and how does it work? So in many ways, we're harnessing something that's ready now and is proven over a really long time in the process. Now there's always advancement for the efficiency and the effectiveness of how we produce through a tank style setup and other things that happen. But largely we're operating on things that are really proven. The process with biomass itself, it really leans into that the process that's used in tanks with any feedstock, really any organic material. A CSTR is kind of like a big crock pot, and it was always how I think about it. And you can put almost any organic material in it, add a little bit of heat, a little bit of water, a little bit of stirring, some agitation, and over a period of about a month, then you'll get clean burning renewable natural gas off the process and create then biofibers and other optimized fertilizers that you can take to complete the circle. So it's a really beautiful process from that perspective. And probably what gets lost in it is all the other value that's created, not just from the gas, but from fertilizers and even the carbon dioxide in the process can be used for food and beverage use if it's upgraded, which we actually plan to do all those pieces as well. So I'll work my way all the way then back up to I think there was a bit of a question, Carol, on feedstocks and kind of managing process of harvesting, et cetera. I think to build on Steve, we're going to be very, very careful and deliberate on how we cycle in the prairie piece, harvesting in cycles that protect wildlife, harvesting in cycles that protect the health of the prairie. It won't be a harvested all at once every single year. There's very much a phased and a stripped kind of approach that we've developed. And we're really trying to, in many ways, emulate nature. Prior to all of this, we had buffalo grazing on the land. We had occasional fires that would come through and burn naturally on prairies. And so in many ways, our harvesting process is meant to emulate already what's happening in nature and really help the prairie thrive. And as well make this reproducible at a large scale. So a lot in there, but really, really good series of questions. Hopefully that covered what you were looking for.
Yes, thank you. And many thanks to Haley with Roeslein, who's managing the slides. Haley, could you go to the slide where there were two pie charts that showed energy production in decatherms? I thought this was very interesting, and I wondered if you could, Ben, maybe explain this a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Really, at a high level, what we were trying to communicate on the slide is the really significant potential that this Horizon 2 project done at scale can achieve. In fact, really big picture as a member on our team who's been in academia for years. He did some white papers, Professor Tom Richard, around this, that we think there's actually enough potential out here to be over 15% of all of the natural gas usage for the country way long term if we were successful to scale it. So that's exciting because in many cases a downstream customer of this product in various sectors, they're going to want to know that there's a meaningful quantity that's there. So that's part of this. But these, I'll focus on the one on the right for the United States overall. There's like 10 different ways to measure nat gas. Decatherms is one. To put that in perspective, the United States uses probably 30 billion decatherms a year. So what we're saying here is that there's kind of 2 of that 30 that was done through this study, but the numbers I mentioned before, there's a possibility it can be even higher. So the big takeaway in this is meaningful quantities of demand are there, which can then be translated into meaningful demand for landowners to consider converting marginal lands to prairie or other cover crops that could be going to this particular industry. Then all the great benefits that can come to the land from that Steve covered around ecology, soil health improvements, and certainly water quality as well.
Thank you. We had 3 questions about asking about the current situation with some federal budget cuts and freezing of grants. Is that affecting Horizon 2? Can you explain that a bit? Because people are concerned.
Yeah, I'll run with a view. Steve's probably got a view too on this, and I think it certainly could, and we're watching it very closely. I think one of the questions said, how will you move forward, which I love, because I think that's we're resolved to find a path forward on this. We're really convicted in the potential. So one is we have contracts, and so we're very much working hard with our really talented and well connected government relations staff, and as well as partners, to step through the process that our new administration is going through to make sure they understand just the impact we have, that frankly is very complementary to the new administrative goals around growth in domestic energy, growth and development of rural economies, and things of that nature. So we're working through that particular channel, and some cautious optimism that can come through. There was a recent example in a space similar to ours 2 weeks ago, where a very large amount of a similar type loan did come through for some renewable energy production out in the state of Montana. So I think there's some examples where some stuff is starting to become unfrozen in our space, and we hope that this can be next up. The other thing I would add to that view in terms of the how, and I think irrespective, I think, of wherever that all takes us, I saw a really interesting stat the other day around demand in food production, but also energy sectors for what's called Scope 3. And that's a really technical thing that gets into how companies look at their environmental impact. And it was something like over 70% of all food companies, whether they're food producers or downstream distributors or retailers, have some type of activity going on in regenerative agriculture, in which, in my view, this is a form of that, where you're working on really natural processes. So there's which is really impressive that most people in downstream industries they're looking at this because they know it's a thing and it's going to grow. And so where I get excited is what's the potential to integrate the cover cropping and prairie pieces into some of these existing programs. I think during the introduction was mentioned my activities prior to coming to Roeslein. And I think in programs that currently exist and are being scaled, that we think we have something that could be embedded into those programs to help make an even bigger impact. So I think irrespective of the outcome federally, I think we're excited of all this other activity in the private sector, where this can be very complementary to helping find ways to continue piloting, but also work towards that long-term vision of 30 million acres. But Steve, I'll let you tackle that if I need to say.
Well, I would just add that we're very fortunate because of the way we did our work, that we've avoided any real problems because of the pause, because of what we learned through our years with the Missouri Prairie Foundation and other places. We know that it's really important to get your seed on the ground, with forbs particularly, with enough time that they would all stratify. So my goal, and we were successful in doing it, was to get all of our acres done in the month of January. And by doing it in January, we had to have our money up front to be able to pay landowners, pay for the seed, pay for the implementation. We got all that. We had that money available before the pause hit. So we're really very fortunate to have gotten most of this year's work done. Now we're going to have some needs coming up. We're going to have to mow a lot here later on, but we expect that the pause is coming to an end. And I mean, frankly, a lot of things have been paused. I have, on my own personal farm, I've been paused on an EQIP grant payment that was already completed and was under the old farm bill. So, that was something that they've owed me for a little while, and I understand that now is getting unpaused. So I believe that we're going to be able to go forward and complete all of our goals. But we're going through a time now of reflection and trying to make our government a little more efficient, I think. And I'm okay with that as long as we don't cut out too close to the bone. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. I think what is so compelling about this project is that it addresses environmental costs up front for so many energy production scenarios. The costs are deferred, right, to maybe the next generation or downstream, literally. And this project addresses so many challenges in one space. With that said, we had a question about discussing the pros and cons of this program compared to, for example, growing corn for ethanol. And of course, as you said, Steve, we all need energy. And there are pros and cons to probably any energy production. But please do share, how is this different from growing corn for ethanol?
Well, there's a place for corn. We can't our so much of the power of this country has been based upon corn and soybeans. We survived World War I. We survived World War II because of the power of our agricultural lands. What we're looking at doing is taking the marginal land that probably should never have been put in row crop, ground that's erodible, that's too steep, ground that would grow prairie very well, but really shouldn't be growing soybeans and corn. I mean, it's too erodible. You have to put finding too much inputs to make a crop, which results in too much runoff and infiltration of nitrates. So we have to survive with corn and with soybeans. We, like I said, share 340 so far 340 miles of field border with corn and soybeans. I don't have an opinion about corn ethanol. I know that it does contribute to a higher price for our corn farmers, and we need our farmers to make money. Without our farmers, we're really in a world of hurt. We're looking for that ground which is marginal, ground that we know that we can slow the erosion down on, and ground that we can infiltrate nitrogen and do all the other ecosystem services that we've talked about. So we're not in competition with it. I think that we want the acres that the farmer maybe can't make any money on in corn and soybeans, because there's a lot of farmers, they'll just average in the bad acres with the good acres. Well, we're suggesting let us have the bad acres, you keep the good acres, and we'll all do well.
I would agree. I think what's exciting about emerging technology, both satellite imagery and artificial intelligence, is that you can get super precise now on the economics of every single part of a farm. And to Steve's point, really learn where is it actually better fit for prairie, where a particular strip may be below the cost of production and it really shouldn't be in a main crop. And so that's where we get excited, is how do we complement row crop agriculture? Row crop agriculture is super important. We need to feed a world that's growing. And that's a whole big challenge, and it's hard to do it perfectly. And so I think we're really trying to, how do we help complement and bring some sustainable solutions to the party as well.
Thank you both. And I would also just comment that we can't have successful agriculture without conserving soil. And so these practices help protect that soil on a grand scale. And of course, with these prairie plantings, they're multifunctional. They're providing habitat for insects and birds in a way that row crops can't. But like you say, it's a complement. And these prairie plantings can go in side by side with row crops, but on land that's less productive for those row crops. We have a question about would this process work with smaller hog and beef farms as well as with large commercial farms?
Steve, you want that one?
Well,
Go ahead.
I can talk. I can talk about where I think our technology is going. We can talk first off about Horizon One. Horizon One is the making of natural gas from hog manure, and to date, I think we've looked at farms, haven't we, Ben, that are in excess of 50,000 hogs. I believe just you have to have enough hogs make enough manure that you can then get it affordably into a gas interconnect. Uh, I know we've developed some processes now where we can go to smaller and smaller farms, uh, at least with Horizon One. And I don't know about extending that to Horizon Two. I think our estimates have been that with the size of the CSTR digesters that we currently envision, we're going to need about 7,000 acres of prairie biomass a year. So perhaps they can be done smaller. I don't know. Uh, it's quite a process, and at some point you have to get it big enough that it can actually pay the bills.
Thank you. And like so many endeavors, more is learned along the way of how to apply this technology in other ways in the future. A question about potential expansion of this process or program to other parts of Missouri or other states.
We absolutely want to expand. The vision is 30 million acres. It's not 40,000, it's 30 million acres. And so that involves all of Missouri, all of Iowa, much of Kansas, all of Illinois, much of Indiana, much of South Dakota and North Dakota, and all the upper Midwest. And so to get 30 million acres, we're going to have to go way beyond our North Missouri footprint.
Yeah, I would build on that. Some of the things I'm working on that are a bit further out from this particular project would bring expansion beyond Missouri, and that's not all quite ready to share yet. But there's absolutely opportunities in all the areas that Steve mentioned, and heck, I think we would have a view as well that there's longer term over time global opportunities as well that we'll want to explore and help be a catalyst to see if we can get going. Roeslein is a global company, has done things in 70 different countries and other parts of its business, and actively seeking to grow its renewable energy activities as well in key regions. So I think for me, it's not just a solution for the Midwest US. It's hopefully something we can bring to the world.
Thank you. We had a question about the seed cost for the prairie plantings. I think you said, Steve, $350 per acre to establish a native reconstruction on per acre. This is solely from the purchased seed, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's roughly the cost that we've extended over a 5-year period
Mhm.
for the
And
28 species. Mm-hmm.
And as those plantings mature, would there be a possibility of timing the biomass harvest to maybe that seed could be another revenue stream for the landowner, or maybe that seed could be used for more acres with the program?
Well, I will tell you that the lawyer that drafted the agreement with the landowners was this one right here. And this lawyer retained the harvest of the seed for our project. And so it's going to be 3 years before we could probably have much viable seed. But yeah, we need to look at using that as a seed source for all kinds of prairie reconstructions. Now it all gets down to labor. When you have a diverse prairie growing up, you can't just. I mean, you could run a combine across it, I guess, and harvest seed, but then you have multi species, and it's hard to separate out. And then anytime you get into hand harvesting, you know how much time and work that costs. And it all involves seed cleaning too. So yeah, I mean, we think the seed part of it's, you know, viable. We're going to have a lot of acres of seed, and I'd like to see that go back on the ground.
Wonderful. A question about the environmental impact of harvesting methane for natural gas. Very compelling program, but this attendee is curious about the carbon footprint of the operation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll run with it. In the world of renewable energy or just in life, there's this thing called the carbon intensity score. And I won't go deep science and how all that's built out, but the scoring of renewable natural gas is close to zero, depending on the feedstock. And in some cases, feedstocks can actually be negative, depending on natural methane that can be released as certain feedstocks are decomposing in nature. And so I think what's exciting about our industry is that we can dramatically lower methane, which is 30 times worse than carbon dioxide, effectively capturing that methane and eventually combusting it as CO2 at 30 times less the impact, if not more. So that's, hopefully that answers that question. It's compared to all renewable energies, it's actually the lowest carbon intensity scoring alternative energy that's available.
Thank you. And as Steve said earlier, of course, for the methane is being captured from the manure digestion, which formerly was going into the atmosphere. So that's been taken, that problem has been taken away. But then also the prairie plants are storing carbon in their roots year round. So even if the above ground biomass is being harvested, you have that gain of carbon storage in the ground, which I assume is maybe where some of that positive carbon comes into play. Is that?
It is, Carol. Yeah, the feedstock itself would be close to zero, but to your point, when you take into account for prairie all the things that are happening on the land, it gets to be super interesting because you are sequestering carbon deeply into the soil. These things have like 20-foot root systems. It's amazing. You are as well through the management of soil nitrate runoff. These things act like have a diapering effect in a way, preventing that from hitting the water stream, but also preventing nitrous oxide from releasing in the air that forms if you over nitrify. That thing's like 80 times worse than carbon dioxide, so you get a benefit there, and on and on and on. So you're getting some really powerful environmental outcomes on the land that are helping to augment and really boost how it's scored.
Thank you. We have another question. I think the question is, how many would it be straightforward to provide, how much prairie biomass equals, a unit of energy? Is there a way for you to explain that?
Yeah, I can attempt at not knowing exactly what the listener is looking for, but if you look at kind of what an average prairie produces in terms of quantities of biomass, we would average probably somewhere between 3 and 4 tons of biomass per acre of prairie. Within that 3 to 4 tons, the yield of gas is what's called biomethane potential in our industry, with certain assumptions, is somewhere between 3 to 4 MMBTUs per ton of biomass that we process. So you can kind of do the math on what 30 million acres gets to, and it gets to a really big number. But that's the potential. I think there was one other one in the chat too, which I think is a good question. I'm going to give a qualitative answer because I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. But then kind of question of how much energy does it take to make energy? And are we really doing any good? And the great news for renewable natural gas produced in this fashion is it's really, really low. The process itself uses very little energy. It's mostly naturally occurring heat that comes off of it through the microbes that are in it. There's a little bit in the winter that's used for maintaining a constant temperature. But this stuff's produced around, it's a 100-degree kind of process, so it's not 1,000-degree process in a really high thermal plant. And other than some small motors for agitation, there's really not a lot of energy used. A little bit to bring the feedstocks off the land into the plant, but what's also interesting is most of the feedstocks for a plant would be sourced within a 25-mile radius to a plant. So you're talking about really decentralized, localized energy production where we're not shipping quantities of material in trucks thousands of miles to get to where it's produced. So it's really positive from that perspective.
That's a really good point. And we had another question about, how is this program affecting farmers' quality of life? And of course, Steve shared the numbers of what was it, nearly $1 million total in payments to farmers. But as you mentioned, Ben, this is funding going out in a decentralized way. It's benefiting many people who live on the land in that geography. Maybe both of you could share a bit more about this local economic angle.
Well, I'm happy to. If in a few weeks you're going to have the opportunity to see season 2 of the Prairie Profits video series, and it's going to start off chronicling the situation for a made up local farmer that I created, and it really chronicles how farmers are faced today with increasing inputs, stable or decreasing amount of commodity prices, and a general system so that very few children are staying on the farm. It's not because they don't want to stay on the farm. It's not because they don't like equipment or like farming. It's because simply the money is not there in an average size farm for another family to survive. And so I know one of the things that our team is really concerned about is the survival and the thriving nature of our small rural communities. And so we've looked at how much money can we bring in through a Horizon 2 payment, how much additional money could be brought in partnering with the landowner based upon the gas price. There with the wildlife potential being on those acres, what kind of additional value does that bring to the ground? Now the farmer may want to hunt it, himself, but that brings probably $30 to $50 an acre in additional value. We are looking at real hard right now how we can bring carbon credit dollars to the landowner for the carbon sequestration that you were talking about earlier, Carol. So if we can bring more money to the landowner than he was getting off of those marginal acres in his row crop, we have a better chance of bringing and keeping that second generation of farmer on the land. And if that next farmer and his family and her family are there, then we get to keep that school open, keep the post office open, and don't have these ghost towns that are all across North Missouri now.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting. Just a couple of other questions, if you still have time. As we discussed, there's no perfect energy solution, but as we've learned from you both, this really hits a lot of the marks in many ways. But there are inputs. There are a couple questions about our herbicides used with the cover crops. How does harvesting biomass affect overwintering insects or other wildlife? And I guess from my perspective, those things may occur, but the net gain of wildlife habitat is much higher, because if you're thinking about a row crop on marginal land, there's probably not providing much for insects at all. And it's certainly not helping water quality if there's erosion. But I don't know if you could speak a little bit more about those inputs and looking at the big picture of the net gains.
Well, our inputs are really, pretty low. I mean, we come in with our seed and we air seed it onto bare dirt or snow. We've been doing it with a pair of Kubota side by sides that go at 19 miles an hour at night, usually when the ground is frozen. This year, we also did use some tractors because the ground was frozen enough we were able to do it. Where we did, there was some cost involved, I'm sure, in fuel in doing all that. But we really have very little input, I think, comparatively in getting the seed on the ground. We don't use fertilizer. We put it on the ground. We don't do any other soil amendments. We don't lime the soil. We don't do any of that. We just take this ground as the farmer gives it to us and gets the seed on the ground. Let God take it from there. As long as we think as long as we have it down early enough, and there hasn't been too heavy or too late spreading of pre-emergent herbicide from the previous year, then our seeds are going to do fine. One of the little bit disturbing things we've learned about farmers is that sometimes they do put a really heavy dose of pre-emergent herbicide late in the summer, which could have some carryover impact. But even more troubling is that prophylactically, some of the farmers are using a pesticide that they're putting on their bean crops in July or early August, whether they have a pest crop or not, which just pretty much does away with all of our bugs in that field. And we need bugs, we need pollinators for our birds, and so I think when we get our prairie, we're gonna really substantially improve the the situation for bugs. Last summer I got the opportunity to speak at an event up in Iowa on Brian Seaver's farm. And on the way home, this was, I believe, in July or early August, I came home in the dark. I never had to stop one time to clean my windshield going across Iowa. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Nevada, Missouri, I would have had to stop every 20 miles and clean my windshield off just because of the number of bugs that I would hit. My wife Ann and I noticed that at our farm in North Missouri, the number of bugs that we find around our lights at night are 25% of what they used to be just 25 years ago. So our bugs our bugs, not just pollinators, are really in trouble. And what we're doing is going to create more bugs. And bugs really are the basis for birds. So I know I got off of it a little bit, but we don't use herbicides at this point. Everything we've done has been in row crop acres. When we go into pasture ground under the CPA 52 lands that I was telling you about, we are going to have to deal with turf grass fescue. And I don't think there really is a better way of dealing with turf grass fescue than either A, spraying it with Roundup once or twice and getting that killed, or B, putting it into a crop of soybeans for 1 year so that you let the farmer take care of that. There's just no other way that we've found. We don't have tarps that are 40 or 50 acres in size that we can kill out fescue underneath. And if any of you folks come up with a good way to kill fescue, let me know, because I don't like spraying Roundup any more than anybody else.
Right. We have to think about these are tools for long-term biodiversity gain, and we also have to think about them as tools to expedite enhancing or stabilizing biodiversity while we still have time to do that. So I think it's important to think about it in terms of how much time do we have. And so we have to use tools that will expedite the process. Just one last question, and I think it's really good because it's from Alina. She says, congratulations on the progress so far. She asked, what have been the biggest hurdles and what innovations or partnerships are helping to overcome them as you scale? And I think that's a good segue also for perhaps you could speak a little bit about the partners, because there are many partners involved. So if you either of you'd like to speak about that.
Well, I can talk about our partners. We have a great relationship with Iowa State and of course the Missouri Prairie Foundation in Carroll. We've learned so much through the Severs Family Farms. Smithfield Foods, I have to say, are great partners with us. I mean, we're not going to be able to do it without them. We work with the Nature Conservancy. The University of Missouri is doing a lot as well. We just really have good relationships with our partners, and they're all pulling in the same direction that we are. And what was the first part of your question, Carol? The
Well,
hurdles, I think.
yeah, and
The
I think
hurdles
you
that
did
we've
touch
had.
on that some, but I think in all of us working together, we're coming up with other connections and uh, you know uh, finding other ways to help each other as well, which is the case when you have a collaborative effort like this.
Well,
Um,
I can tell you the biggest hurdle that we have probably is in rental rates right now. In some ways, we're competing with the farm, but we're competing with uh, federal crop insurance. I mean, some of these federal programs, in some ways, may distort the actual value of rental rates for row crop. So, for example, in Mercer County, we're really competitive at $160 an acre. In Worth County, we're not. The rental rates are probably in excess of $220 an acre. And so for that reason, I hardly have any acres in Worth County. We're doing better in Adair County and Sullivan County, but the nature of the ground in Mercer County is hillier. It doesn't pay as much for CRP. You can look at CRP rates and see where we're going to be most effective. Lower those rates, the more attractive our program is. The other thing is that an interesting thing about Princeton and the Mercer County area, a lot of that ground is purchased by recreational hunter conservationists. These guys who are primarily uh, family hunters, deer hunters, want to have property as close to the Iowa border as they can, with an understanding that Iowa produces huge deer, but coming from out of state, they can't have the opportunity to have a tag every year. So they want to be as close to the Iowa border as they can, grow prairie, which then could grow 200-inch Boone and Crockett deer. And so I guess my biggest hurdle is competing with what farmers are willing to pay for marginal ground, even though they may not make $160 an acre on it on that specific acre. When they mix it in with all their other acres in a crop insurance paradigm, uh, they can afford to pay more than what we can. So I guess that's my biggest hurdle, is that I have to really work and really seek out the hunter conservationists first, because they're the ones that really want to have a prairie. It's not just about the dollars with them.
Thank you. With that, I think we're going to need to wrap up, but before we leave, Amanda has some closing remarks about other upcoming programs, and she will close us out. Before I turn it over to Amanda, I just want to really thank you, Steve and Ben, for an excellent presentation, and thank everybody for joining us and the excellent questions that everyone had. And as Amanda will mention, an email will go out tomorrow with a recording of this webinar, as well as some of the links to resources that were mentioned in the program. So Amanda?
All right. Thank you, Carol. And thanks to all who have tuned in and contributed to the conversation. As commented by one viewer, it's always nice to learn about the different ways we approach conservation. Thank you for that. Our collective gratitude goes out to Ben, Steve, and Carol for their thoughtful discussion as well. Access to this recording and other related information will be sent to all who registered in a follow-up email from me tomorrow. Before we conclude today's webinar, please stay tuned for a review of upcoming webinars and events. Register now and join us on Wednesday, March 12th at 4 p.m. for our MPF webinar, Grassland Grouse, Beauty, Biology, and Conservation, with acclaimed nature photographer, Napadal Pathong. Registration is also open for our Grow Native webinar, Native Cool Season Grasses and Sedges for Landscaping, Forage, and Wildlife Benefits, with Elizabeth Hamilton Steele of Hamilton Native Outpost in Elk Creek, Missouri. This webinar will take place at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, March 26th. You can register for both of those now. If you haven't already, mark your calendars for our Missouri Prairie Foundation Spring Plant Sales, happening in cities across Missouri, March through May. More information on each sale, including participating vendors and pre-order details, can be found across all of our channels and in the follow-up email reaching your inbox tomorrow. Registration for all of the aforementioned events and much more can be found at our website under the Events tab. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Everyone, have a great night.